Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, a significant landslip forces more people from their homes, this time in Hutt Valley. The Mayor is here with the details. Meanwhile, Muriwai residents effectively left homeless due to cyclone damage and uncertainty get red sticker reviews. So who wins and who loses? We talk to a business owner and resident live. The breaks go on Speedway and any concert plans for Western Springs Stadium. Thanks for that too, Gabrielle. And more on the green policies composted by the government. Also, 3 decades on, a Swedish journalist is in the Coromandel investigating the murders of backpackers Urban Hoagland and Heidi Pakkanen.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Madia, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. Residents blocked from their homes by road closures in a Lower Hutt suburb say a water leak not attended to by council was the cause of today's slip. 10 homes were evacuated at Point Howard. Resident Stephen told RNZ the owners of a property where the slip is had been in communication with Hutt City Council and Watercare for nearly a year about the leak, while fellow resident Marianne Morgan said a neighbour, who was an engineer, had emailed the council just on Friday to say a slip was imminent.
We knew there'd been a leak there and neighbours had been emailing the council since December about it. The leak had recently become a lot bigger and created a stream which we could hear from our house gushing down the gully.
Power, gas and water supplies remain off. Meanwhile, Auckland residents face more expensive water bills later this year to fund infrastructure upgrades. The 9.5% rise will cost an average household just over $2 more a week. The Climate Change Minister says he won't resign, but does believe the government has breached its cooperation agreement with the Greens. Te Pāti Māori says James Shaw should step down in shame after climate initiatives were axed to pay for cost of living measures. Mr Shaw, who holds the climate change portfolio outside Cabinet, says quitting will leave him no influence. He is concerned, however, that the Green Party's cooperation agreement is being snubbed.
As has been long-standing practice, where there are decisions that are made in areas that relate either to our areas of ministerial responsibility or more broadly to other areas that are in the cooperation agreement, that we are consulted on those before a Cabinet decision is made.
Shaw says he raised his concerns with the Prime Minister but wouldn't say what Chris Hipkins said in response. Shares in banks around the world have slumped despite reassurances from the US President that America's financial system is safe. Authorities are vowing to protect customer deposits in the collapsed Silicon Valley and Signature banks. The BBC's Theo Leggett has more.
If there are fears about the health of the banking sector, then those fears are almost by definition international, because the banking sector is international. And the issue that the banking sector as a whole is facing at the moment is anxiety. Nobody's quite sure where the next problem is going to come from. The issues at Silicon Valley Bank appeared almost out of the blue, and they blew up into something big very, very quickly.
The family of a teenage boy who died after being stabbed at an Airbnb house party in Christchurch says they'll endure a lifetime of heartbreak and pain. Kanye Eruera Harimatetehuhu has been jailed for 5.5 years for the manslaughter of 16-year-old Zion Purukamu and for seriously injuring 2 other boys in 2021. At sentencing, Zion's sister, Amber, told Tehuhu nothing could justify what he'd done.
I could say you took the hearts and souls of us all, but that would be an understatement. Not only did you take the life of my brother, but you took all the life from his parents, his siblings, his friends. You took the love and light from our home and sent it away forever.
Zion Purukamu's parents brought his ashes to the High Court. An Iranian man is overjoyed after immigration reversed its decision that his elderly parents posed a risk of overstaying their visa. Immigration New Zealand has been rejecting Iranian visas, saying they may be discouraged from returning to a country beset by political upheaval. Amin Saidi's parents arrive in Auckland soon, and they're looking forward to celebrating Persian New Year.
My mom started crying. She was very happy to realize that finally we can meet each other again. So that was very glad news for us.
Officials are reviewing 4 other cases. To sport, and Black Caps pace bowler Neil Wagner will miss up to 6 weeks of cricket as he rehabilitates a torn hamstring and a bulging disc in his back. Wagner was forced from the field in the second innings of the first cricket test against Sri Lanka. He did return to bat when wickets were falling late in the Black Caps' winning run chase yesterday. Coach Gary Stead says criticism of Wagner's age is irrelevant as the 37-year-old still has plenty to offer.
He runs through brick walls for you, doesn't he? So you give him some situations that are really tough, and I think he often comes into his own in the second innings of a game as well when the wicket really flattens out.
Doug Bracewell comes into the squad as an injury replacement for the second test. And the legendary American high jumper Dick Fosbury, whose technique revolutionised the sport, has died at the age of 76. The method he pioneered, throwing himself backwards over the bar, is now used by almost all serious high jumpers. It became known as the Fosbury flop. Reflecting on it years later, he explained what he'd been thinking.
It was not that I was trying to win, but I was trying to not lose. I was the worst high jumper on our team. My body changed its position going from sitting up over the bar to laying flat on my back. By the end of the day, I improved by half a foot. I knew then that I may have something.
Dick Fosbury won gold at the 1968 Olympic Games. That's the news.
A big Black Caps win.
Oh, it's Massey's out. If he hits, he's out. He's safe. Oh, double play. We're going upstairs.
And a star player giving it everything.
If there was anyone in New Zealand who was going to push to get that run, Neil Wagner was the guy.
Well, the funny thing is, Nathan, he ran out to the fields. He was trying. He looked to be sending a message.
Watch me go.
Sports and news, the kind of effort we put into every show. Morning Report, weekdays at 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waded Upper, fine apart from a few cloudy periods this afternoon. For the remainder of the North Island, fine apart from areas of cloud tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, fine today. From tonight, some cloud and isolated showers about Westland tomorrow. Fiordland, often cloudy with a few showers about southern Fiordland, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine, some areas of morning and evening cloud. Otago, partly cloudy today. Tomorrow, isolated showers about eastern Otago. Southland, some cloud, a few showers retreating to the coast towards evening and clearing tomorrow with fine breaks developing. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers. It's 7 minutes past 5. Our next news headlines and any traffic news will be at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Homes have been evacuated in a Wellington suburb after a slip came down, taking out power lines and a gas line. Residents of 10 homes in Point Howard in Lower Hutt have been told to get out, and 75 homes are without power. The council is asking people to conserve water while they work to restore services. Crystal Gibbons reports.
Wellington Water says a burst drinking water pipe has triggered the slip. Stephen lives on Howard Road next to where it comes down and says he first saw it around 8 o'clock last night. He says Wellington Water were there all night.
They dug the road up. They worked up there till about 4 in the morning, dug the road up and patched it up, but the water was still pouring out.
This morning, Stephen says he saw a power line fall.
As I got to the corner here, I saw the power lines down across the road, and then I heard that snap, and they just snapped, sparks, smoke, everything, and they fell into the water that's running down the road.
Fire and Emergency have been on site today, and Assistant Area Commander Gareth Hughes says the section of land that slipped away essentially knocked out all services.
We've got power off a power pole which has been disrupted and isolated, and we've got a gas main that goes through there which has been isolated as well, and we've got the main potable water or drinking water, and of course then sewage, so that's been isolated too.
For resident Debbie McCall, the arrival of fire trucks this morning was the first she knew of the slip.
Came out the gate and there was this enormous fire truck out here with huge aerials, and it was a drone as well, and we didn't really know what was going on. Next thing, there were also police here, and few workmen around. We're not quite sure what was happening.
But for resident Mary-Ann Morgan, it came as less of a surprise.
We knew there'd been a leak there, and neighbours had been emailing the council since December about it. The leak had recently become a lot bigger and created a stream which we could hear from our house gushing down the gully.
Although no one was injured from the slip, Ms Morgan says it was a close call for her daughter.
She was trying to get home, or through that access way. She was about to go through, and a resident stopped her and said, "Don't go through, the power line's about to fall," or had fallen. If it hadn't been for the resident stopping her, she would have driven through.
Cordons remain up in Howard Road tonight as crews work to restore services.
And the Hutt City Mayor, Campbell Barry, joins us now. Kia ora, can you tell us what the situation is right now at that site?
Kia ora, yes I can. So we currently have 75 houses without power, 165 houses in the wider area without water due to not being able to get to the water pipe that needs to be fixed. And we have 20 homes which only have pedestrian access at the moment.
So that water pipe, why is it not possible to get access?
Essentially, the slip is blocking access to be able to get to where the repairs need to happen. So water is currently out. We do have tanks in place for residents to be able to go fill up their own water if needed, but it just means it's going to take a bit more time. We're thinking around 24 hours to be able to restore water to that area.
And the tanks, if people want to access them, where are they?
So they are based just down the road in the area. So we've got information on the Hutt City Council website for people to be able to access. But we have two big Wellington water tanks there, which people will be able to see clearly.
So you're talking a number of houses, but do you know how many people have had to get out of their homes?
I don't have numbers on people. We know that there will be a number of people returning home from work and from school. We have had our emergency services out there door knocking the local area to be able to communicate what's happening. We are advising people if they can to stay with family or friends, or they can reach out to us at the Hutt City Council as well, and we can provide any support that we can as well for them.
Just to be clear, what are the number of households who are under, in essence, a mandatory evacuation order that you've asked to get out?
No, so we have 20 houses that don't have access due to the slip. There hasn't been a mandatory evacuation order at this stage, and we are just advising people to stay in their homes if they are still in the area while the work is done on restoring power and also fixing the water issues.
Right, so those people who have left their homes have left them voluntarily?
That's correct.
Okay. Were you aware that residents had complained about that particular slope and were concerned that there could be a slip because of water?
We have looked back to see when reports were made around the particular water leak. We are looking into that, so we really don't know what has caused the slip. We, of course, had a heavy rainfall event yesterday, and we will be looking into that to get to the bottom of exactly what has caused it. We do have a challenge, of course, with leaks in the Wellington region, but we do want to be reassured of exactly what's happened here in Wellington Water's processes in dealing with leaks when they arise if you potentially have these types of issues occurring.
But as yet, you haven't found a record of a complaint. You're looking for one.
This particular leak was reported, yes, I believe in January. I'm just getting some more information on that, and we will look into it. So it's still early days. We want to deal with the immediate situation and ensuring that we can restore those services, but we will look at exactly what's happened here. Sure,
but can you tell me with that January complaint whether action was taken?
Action has been taken. I believe there was then another leak or another issue, and that was fixed more recently in the last couple of days or so. But again, it's a little bit too soon to say exactly what's happened in that process. So we'll get to the bottom of that and share that information.
Was the stability of the site checked at the time?
I wouldn't be able to comment further on that until we look at this in more detail. We've been dealing with the immediate situation today.
Understand.
And ensuring, yeah.
So whose land is the slip on?
I haven't got that information in front of me in regards to who takes the responsibility or exactly where the boundary lines are. So I'll get more information on that.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate you joining us. That is the Hutt City Mayor, Campbell Barry there. It is 14 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Freight trucks can finally move along a critical supply route for Hawke's Bay, much to the relief of local businesses. Vital supply convoys have begun along State Highway 5 from Napier to Taupō after it was extensively damaged by Cyclone Gabrielle. Neva Chittick reports from Napier.
Tim Stevens is manager of the Chantel Shop, a local organic grocery store in central Napier. He says the call to allow freight in is excellent news.
It means that we can get deliveries in quicker with our fresh produce. Some of it comes from out of town, and it just means we can get it on the shelves quicker, so it's fresher and will last longer for our customers. Our freight companies have been going around the long way through Palmy, so it just means that there's been possible delays.
The current route is via Palmerston North and takes 5 hours one way. Mr Stevens says with local crops largely wiped out, produce has also had to be sourced from further afield.
We've had to source organic vegetables from the South Island and Lower North Island, places that weren't hit so hard. So that's been probably our focus rather than the extra freight times from Auckland.
Benjamin Fernandez owns a local coffee roastery and cafe. He says the detours are not sustainable long term.
Obviously the people that are more affected than us are our raw material suppliers, so they're struggling getting the stock here, but also cost more than anything. So that's obviously they're not in a position to be able to just simply absorb that, which makes it tricky for us, and that will ultimately be passed on.
The disruptions nearly caused them to run out of coffee beans.
We came really close about 10 days ago, I would have said, yeah. Luckily our green bean supplier up in Auckland was like super vigilant and got around to making sure that it was done. But yeah, there was a period there straight after the cyclone where we had no power for 6 days, or 7 days actually, at our main roastery site. It's nice to have a little bit of assurance with the power now, and obviously this happening.
Essential goods like food, livestock and building supplies can now come in on State Highway 5 in 2 hours. Waka Kotahi's Martin Colditz says 30 trucks got through in the first convoy from Taupō to Napier this morning.
We've had no major concerns on the way through. We have roughly 32 damaged sites with underslips and also like bigger slip. We had also our technical engineers on site to monitor these sites during the movement, and it went all well.
But he says it will take a little longer for the road to fully open again.
We're currently aiming for the end of the month to open up for the public, if we can do it safely, and there will be definitely traffic management in place in various spots, so watch the space.
When it does, Benjamin Fernandez says Napier has one message for people, especially Aucklanders looking for a holiday.
We're here, we're ready to trade, and we're up and running. We're not underwater anymore, and we need the help probably now more than ever.
In the meantime, convoys will continue to run each weekday.
Labour's policy bonfire has left its potential government partners feeling burned. The Greens believe yesterday's announcement was a breach of their cooperation agreement with Labour. And Te Pāti Māori is calling it a concession to climate change deniers. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Enter Parliament's power players. Te Pāti Māori. The latest poll puts them in a pivotal position. Labour and the Greens could not go it alone. To form a government, they would need the support of Rawiri Waititi and Debbie Ngaruapeka.
It's probably necessary that they do have another person in that bed because they clearly are not able to advance kaupapa that important to us.
Few polite words for their potential partners. On the contrary, Te Pāti Māori is scathing of yesterday's policy purge, accusing the Prime Minister of prioritising his re-election over the climate crisis.
This is a total disrespect to all the work that's been done in this space.
You've got a government that's backtracking, it's going in reverse very quickly.
They seem to be trying to appeal to climate deniers.
And they're not the only ones unhappy. The Greens too saw many of their darlings turfed. The Cash for Clunkers initiative scrapped, the container return scheme trashed, and public transport ambitions slowed down.
I am really disappointed with some of the choices that were made.
It is too slow. The rate of change in reducing climate pollution is too slow.
The Greens are also upset with the process. They were first informed of the changes yesterday morning in their first formal sit-down with the Prime Minister. James Shaw views that as a breach of the party's cooperation agreement, as well as long-standing practice, and told Chris Hipkins as much.
When you're in government, you have good days and bad days.
The Climate Change Minister should be ashamed of himself. In fact, he should stand down.
Walking away leaves you with no influence at all.
The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, says he continues to have a good working relationship with the Greens. He denies he has sidelined the climate for the sake of an election and says the government remains committed to its climate targets.
The schemes yesterday that I announced the deferral of, or in some cases the cancellation of, were going to make a very, very small contribution to our emissions reductions. And actually for the cost involved, with a smaller level of spending in other areas, we could easily achieve comparable levels of emissions reduction.
Of course, that raises the question of why those policies were being pursued in the first place. National's Nicola Willis says the government shouldn't get plaudits for dumping dumb ideas.
We need to manage the economy better so that New Zealanders face a lower cost of living and can experience higher incomes. That's been our tune for a long time. Chris Hipkins has lately learned how to hum it, but that doesn't mean that the leopard has changed its spots.
National has its own worries to deal with. The latest poll has National down 3 points and without a pathway to power, even with the assistance of ACT.
Well, look, the polls go up and down.
There's a long way to run until the election.
It's just part of the ebb and flow of election year.
We'll just continue to focus on the job that we have at hand.
Perhaps even more worrying are the preferred Prime Minister numbers. Just 17% picked Christopher Luxon as the one for the job, down 5 points, trailing 10 points behind Chris Hipkins. Christopher Luxon is isolating after testing positive for COVID-19, leaving his colleagues to mount a defence today.
He's doing a fantastic job. He's been a bit out of the public limelight for the last couple of months.
Look, he hasn't had much of the spotlight. Chris is out there. Obviously, he'd like to see the polls higher, I imagine, if I was him.
Shane Reti says New Zealanders just need to see more of Christopher Luxon, and they'll come around.
I see the man that you don't see. I see the man after hours. There are still many parts and many facets of Chris Luxon to be revealed to the public.
But there's not much time to do so. Today marks 7 months till the election. It's promising to be a white-knuckle ride.
And that was our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch reporting there. 21 minutes after 5 and your checkpoints on RNZ National. Homai or whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Do you think that the government has burnt the Greens by dumping those particular policies? And as National says, do they get credit for dumping dumb ideas, as they put it? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz. The email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anea Iwi, mena pita kōrero.
Residents in a Lower Hutt suburb say they'd been complaining for months to the council about the leaking water pipe, blamed for a serious slip. Hutt City Mayor Campbell Barry says 75 houses are without power, 165 houses in the wider area are without water, and 20 homes only have pedestrian access after the landslip at Point Howard today. Mayor Barry told Checkpoint it could take 24 hours to restore water to the area. Climate Change Minister James Shaw says he won't resign after the government cut climate projects to pay for cost of living measures. Te Pāti Māori says Mr Shaw, who holds the climate change portfolio outside Cabinet, should go in shame for failing to do his job. Mr Shaw says he does believe the government has breached its cooperation agreement with the Greens, but quitting would leave him with no influence. A day before the 4th anniversary of the Christchurch mosque shootings, in which 51 people died, a new date has been set aside for the coronial inquiry. It was to begin in May, but the amount of evidence means the hearing will now take place over 6 weeks in Christchurch, beginning on the 24th of October. Auckland residents can expect to see their water bills increase by $2.20 each week from July. Watercare says it's increasing its prices by 9.5% to pay for infrastructure upgrades. And 30 trucks carrying essential goods travelled on State Highway 5 from Taupo to Napier today, the first time since Cyclone Gabrielle inflicted extensive damage on the road. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, everything in the main centres appears to be travelling normally. I'll have more news headlines and any other traffic news for you at 20 to 6.
Kia ora, Iho. Coach Gary Stead has deflected any criticism of the ageing Black Cap squad after yesterday's final ball win over Sri Lanka in the first test in Christchurch. On his 37th birthday, injured New Zealand paceman Neil Wagner defied the odds to join Kane Williamson at the crease to help seal the Black Caps win. Wagner now faces up to 8 weeks on the sidelines, ruling him out of the final test of the summer, which starts on Friday. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Well, this was another nail-biter, right? So what does this latest setback mean for Wagner and the Black Caps bowling stocks?
Well, Neil Wagner says this double injury blow, so that's the torn hamstring and the bulging disc in his back, he isn't going to let that end his international career. On the Country Sport Breakfast this morning, he said he was definitely not done and dusted. So he says he's been playing through some pain and some niggles, and anyone who's watched him run into the crease is probably, you can understand, he's putting that body, a 37-year-old body, through some pretty intense G-force, I guess, as well, through his knees and all of that type of thing. But Gary Stead, the Black Caps coach today, when asked about Wagner's future with the team, he said that Wagner actually keeps his body in really good shape and that age is irrelevant, that it's not really a factor for Wagner. And he sees that Wagner will actually be of benefit to the team during test matches, during the second innings when it's a little bit flatter and the pitch is probably more designed to what Wagner can do for New Zealand now, which is what we saw during that England test as well. But Wagner himself seems quite surprised his body's held up as it has, so he now does have probably a realistic 12-week break, which means that he'll miss out on some county cricket with Yorkshire. So he'll be sitting recuperating there, but, you know, he has his vision on coming back for the Black Caps.
And changing to the white ball cricket, the Black Caps one-day international squad for the Sri Lanka series was named today, and some key players are missing.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a list here. So Kane Williamson, Tim Southey, Devon Conway and Mitch Santner, they'll all miss the entire ODI series for Indian Premier League duties. So they're not representing New Zealand. Instead, they're going across to do the T20 League in India. So that's Williamson linking up with his new IPL side, the Gujarat Titans, Southey with the Kolkata Knight Riders, and Conway and Santner with the Chennai Super Kings. But they're not the only ones. After the first ODI, so the IPL starts on March 31, that first ODI against Sri Lanka is the 25th of March. So these players will play in the first ODI and then will leave to go to India. So that's Finn Allen, Lockie Ferguson, Glenn Phillips. So that's taking it up to 7 players who we've lost out of, that would be regular starters out of the Black Caps for an ODI series. They're actually in India for this. So again, that means a little bit of a shuffle around. So that's Mark Chapman and Henry Nichols, 2 people we probably have heard of before, being for the second ODI. But there are a couple of new players. So that's Auckland bowler Ben Lister and Canterbury bowler Chad Bowes. They're in line to get their first ODI caps for New Zealand. And Test wicketkeeper Tom Blundell also gets an opportunity in white ball, and as does Will Young, who got sent away from the Test squad to play Plunkett Shield. So he gets an opportunity there as well. And today, Gary Stead was saying that you could probably expect to see a few more opportunities like this, where there's 16 white ball games between now and May. So he's probably going to run through the rotations and see some players that maybe we haven't seen in white ball cricket before, as he's kind of got running out of opportunities and running out of options.
Thank you, Felicity. Sports reporter Felicity Reid there. Some properties in the Muriwai exclusion zone have had their red sticker status reviewed following new information that landslides in the area appear to be slowing down. More than 125 properties in the West Auckland Beach settlement had been red stickered. Motutara Road and Domain Crescent are currently cordoned off, and that's left some residents literally camping out or couch surfing, waiting to hear the fate of their properties. News Auckland Council has previously said could take up to 6 months. Claire Bradley has a business and a home in Muriwai's red zone and joins us now. Kia ora, Claire. What is the latest with the review of the sticker situation?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, we had a newsletter from the council this afternoon explaining that the reassessment process that they've been going through has been completed and peer reviewed. And they are now expecting to be able to tell all residents with red stickered properties what the updated status is. Nothing in my inbox yet.
So you don't know the property of your particular property, but they have said a number are being downgraded from red to yellow or even lower.
Yes, there were some statistics in the newsletter indicating that a number of the properties that have been red stickered will either go to yellow or white, which is encouraging.
Okay. So dealing with the council emergency management team, are you happy with that?
It's been a really difficult process. It seems to us on the ground that the emergency management team has been significantly under-resourced and maybe lacked experience. Not to say that they weren't doing their absolute best in a difficult situation, but for those of us who were desperate for information, it was hard to get information from them, hard to understand what their plan was or what the timelines were going to be. And that added an additional layer of stress to what was already an incredibly stressful situation.
Are you politely saying that they're out of their depth?
Well, it seems to us that all councils in New Zealand would have difficulty in a situation like this. And I think, and it's a view that's commonly held by many of the residents, that it would be better if central government had an emergency management leadership team that could come in, that had a well-designed and developed playbook and experienced leaders who could then work with councils to make sure that things were done in a consistent and coherent manner.
So you're basically talking about a natural disaster flying squad. They come in and they are the decision makers and they command all the resources below them, including council resources?
Yes. So, I mean, there are a number of agencies involved. And of course, there's insurance companies, there's EQC, there's police, there's Auckland Transport. In our case, there's also water care. You know, there are so many different parts of the puzzle to put back together again. That it really needs somebody who is able to coordinate all of that and to understand all of the various issues.
Presumably we have some precedent for this, having had the Kaikoura earthquakes and also Christchurch. In your experience, are we drawing on that information sufficiently?
It didn't seem that way to us.
In what way?
Well, we had community meetings. There didn't seem to be a plan or a playbook that they were drawing from. They certainly weren't able to give us timelines in the way that this last newsletter is very clear on timelines. And while the message might not be positive, and obviously won't be for all of those people whose properties are going to remain red stickered, at least you then know what the timeline's going to be. And they've been clear on that. It's going to be months and years before some kind of engineered solution, if there is one, is put in place for those red stickered properties.
You're in a bit of a lottery at the moment, right? I mean, you personally as well. You've got a business in Muriwai and a house, and yours is an accommodation business. So you've essentially got a red sticker. Where does this leave you now?
Well, we're closed. We've been closed since the night of the storm. I mean, the lodge was essentially the backdrop to, the tragic loss of Craig and Dave. And there is damage to the lodge site, not to the part of the site that offers, the deli and the little cool store and the short-term accommodation, but the lower part of the site that had permanent residents, some, a music studio, an artist studio, a massage studio, all of that is destroyed. It's under 2 houses and several vehicles and metres of rubble from the hillside across the road. So it is a really complex situation, but not being able to even go there, apart from a brief visit the Thursday after the storm, has been really difficult. And we know that there are belongings and precious things that are there that we might be able to get once we are able to safely access the site.
I know there's been some controversy about the cordons, right? So at the moment, basically, unless you are a resident, a local as such, you're not really supposed to be in the village. And I'm wondering, when do you think, you're basically at the entrance to Auckland's playground there in many ways, when do you think the public should be invited back?
I think we really need to be back on our feet. And the facilities need to be operating. So at the moment, water supply is very challenging. Some of us are on tank water in Muriwai, and some of us are on a small town supply provided by Water Care. Importantly, the regional park, sand dunes, the little cafe that's down the bottom, the campground, the big campground, the surf school, the surf club, all of those draw their water from the water care facility. And it's only, I think, today that water care have been allowed access to their facility, which is just down the road from the lodge. The damage, and they will come up with a plan about how to re-establish the supply.
Appreciate your time, Claire. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Claire Bradley. She's got a business there in that red stickered zone and also a house. And as you heard, they've been given notification today that a review has happened of the red stickers. A number of those have been downgraded. Individual homeowners are yet to hear whether they're, one of the lucky ones or not. It is 26 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa in Nainei, called Giles Beckford. Giles, this push pay story, on and on it goes. Takeover bidders refuse to walk away, as does the business team. What's going on?
Kia, look, this is one of the more interesting takeover bids we've had in quite a while. It was strange because you had big investment institutions standing up and saying, this is rubbish, it's cheap, it's opportunistic, we're going to vote no, which they never do. They always do these things behind closed doors. This is a takeover offer, $1.5 billion worth, and just refuses to die. 10 days ago, the shareholders mustered enough votes to block it, and you would have thought that was a wooden stake through the heart. But then they had an extension so that the board and the bidders agreed, look, go away and have a rethink about it. Perhaps you can come up with another deal. That deadline ran out last night. And then this morning they come out and say, well, look, we've kicked the can down the road again. We've put the bid, it's still on life support. We're talking to select shareholders, which is their way of saying, we're trying to twist the arm and sweeten the deal, see if we can get the dissidents over the line to accept it. We'll wait and see if that happens, but I haven't seen a takeover bid like this that's been first fiercely resisted and then pursued quite doggedly by the bidders. So they must want it quite well. They're going to have to up their price. They were offering $1.34 a share at the beginning. The market people I've been speaking to say at the very least they've got to offer somewhere in the region of $1.45 a share. We'll wait and see whether they're willing to come to that. The new deadline is 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. I could be back on Thursday, or Nona will be back on Thursday, and we'll just say, look, here's another extension. We'll wait and see. It's getting an element of farce about it, but it doesn't often happen in the corporate world.
And Giles, the brain drain apparently hasn't happened. Who says?
Oh, you remember when we were all worried, well, some people were worried about, the exit of people the moment borders were open, there'd be a drain of talent out of the country, and we would suffer accordingly. Well, the numbers that we're getting from Stats NZ shows that where we were losing people for much of last year when the borders opened, we're now actually gaining them in rising numbers, and we're starting to get back to migration gains, 33,000 in the past year, which is getting back towards the level that we were seeing before the pandemic hit. So from that point of view, you'd have to say the brain drain hasn't happened, although undoubtedly we will be losing talented people. Interesting to see that there's a rise in the number of Kiwis going across the ditch to Australia. And that might be personal reasons, but one suspects also for work reasons and lifestyle. So from that point of view, it's good. It might ease some of the labour shortages that we've been hearing about and we talk incessantly about, and the strain that puts on the economy. But it's a double-edged sword, because the more people that come into the country on a long-term basis, they're boosting demand. They're demanding services and housing and all these sorts of things. And this is at a very time when the Reserve Bank, of course, is raising interest rates to try and dampen demand. So there's a hint of inflation on one side, some easing of labour market pressures on the other. We'll see how they pan out, but we can say, I think, quite clearly, we haven't actually seen the brain drain. It hasn't eventuated.
Giles, before you gallop off, can you please trot through the markets?
For you, no problems at all. The local share market down 77 points for the top 50 index. That's about 0.2%. At one stage, it was down more than 1%. It got the jitters, as most markets have, for that continuing banking problem in the States. And Aussie was down more than 2% at one stage. Their banks were down. So we've recovered lost ground, but we're still looking a bit on the nervous side. The currency, 62.1 US cents, 93.5 Aussie, and just over 51 British pence.
Thank you, Giles. Giles Beckford joining us live there from our Wellington studio. In breaking news, the NZEI has confirmed primary school teachers will go ahead with the strike on Thursday. They want to see immediate action on staffing, student support, teacher relief and recognition of their work. So confirming NZEI has confirmed primary school teachers will strike on Thursday. The US, UK and Australia have rubber-stamped a major security deal which includes a fleet of next-generation nuclear-powered submarines for Australia. President Joe Biden says it will boost security and stability in the Asia-Pacific region for decades. The pact will also cost Canberra about $400 billion over the next 3 decades. The ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald reports.
After years of negotiations, the details of Australia's nuclear submarine program have been revealed. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is in San Diego with US President Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to announce the deal.
The AUKUS agreement we confirm here in San Diego represents the biggest single investment in Australia's defence capability in all of our history.
The federal government has confirmed it'll buy 3 nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines from the United States in the next 10 years, with the option to buy 2 more.
This is the first time in 65 years and only the second time in history that the United States has shared its nuclear propulsion technology, and we thank you for it.
The Virginia-class is a fast-attack submarine. It's designed to seek and destroy enemy submarines and surface ships. It's also used to insert special forces into operations. The agreement also includes the continued design and development of a brand new submarine known as the SSN AUKUS. The new design will be based on work already underway in the UK to replace their Astute-class submarines. 8 of the SSN AUKUS boats will be built for the Royal Australian Navy, with the first to be delivered in the early 2040s. The total cost of the program will be between $268 and $368 billion over the next 3 decades. The submarines will be nuclear-powered but conventionally armed. Anthony Albanese says Australia is a committed leader in the international non-proliferation regime.
We will continue to adhere to all of our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Treaty of Rarotonga.
US President Joe Biden reiterated that point.
And I want to be clear. I want to be clear to everyone from the outset, right off the bat, so there's no confusion or misunderstanding on this critical point. These subs are powered, not nuclear-armed subs. They're nuclear-powered, not nuclear-armed. Australia is a proud non-nuclear weapon state and is committed to stay that way. These boats will not have any nuclear weapons of any kind on them.
The 3 AUKUS partners say this deal is about defence and stability and shouldn't be seen as an act of aggression in the region.
AUKUS has one overriding objective: to enhance the stability of the Indo-Pacific amid rapidly shifting global dynamics.
It is 13 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai Ofakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. A lot of you getting in touch about the policies that Labor has chosen to put on the back burner. We'll get to some of that shortly. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie standing by with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
The Hutt City Mayor says a broken pipe that's led to a slip in Eastbourne was reported to the council in January. Campbell Barry says 75 houses are without power, 165 houses in the wider area are without water, and 20 homes only have pedestrian access after the landslip at Point Howard today. Mayor Barry told Checkpoint the pipe was fixed after the complaint but later leaked again. The government is giving its strongest indications yet of a Commerce Commission study into bank profits. A new report from consultancy firm KPMG has found banks' collective profits rose 17% for the year ended December to reach $7.18 billion. Commerce Minister Duncan Webb, that number was so big I had to keep reading it. Commerce Minister Duncan Webb says if a market study is found to be needed and appropriate, then the government will do it. 3 more shipments of live cattle are expected to depart New Zealand for China before a ban on the trade at the end of next month. The ban follows the 2020 sinking of the Gulf Livestock 1 with nearly 6,000 cattle and 43 crew on board, including 2 New Zealanders. The chair of Hawke's Bay Iwi, Ngāti Kahungunu, says he's working with government agencies to help the many whānau who lost their homes in Cyclone Gabrielle. Baden Barber says the cyclone made a big housing crisis worse, with more than 1,000 families in transitional housing. And the New Zealand Educational Institute has confirmed that primary school teachers will strike on Thursday. They want to see immediate action on pay and conditions. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, nothing pressing to report at the moment on any of our main routes this evening. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thank you, Evie. More than 30 years since the murders of the Swedish backpackers Heidi Parkinen and Urban Hoagland, a journalist from their home country is here reinvestigating the Coromandel killings. Convicted double murderer David Tamaheri, who spent nearly 20 years in jail for their murders, has an appeal later this year after being granted a royal prerogative of mercy after exhausting all his legal options. The controversial case continues to divide opinion. The discovery of Mr Hoagland's body a year after David Tamaheri's 1990 conviction disproved critical witness testimony that his body had been dumped at sea and his watch stolen by his killer. His watch was still on his wrist. In 2017, a jailhouse informant who claimed Mr Tamaheri had confessed to him and disclosed details of where the bodies were was convicted of several counts of perjury over his evidence at the trial. Swedish journalist Luva Laisarides is in Thames and says there's many inconsistencies in the case, and he would like to speak to anyone who met the couple or were involved in the investigation.
So this is one of the cases in Sweden that I think a lot of people in Sweden remembers this case. But I was surprised to learn that in New Zealand this is so much more well known. It's been a big surprise to me coming here and hearing how people still today have so clear memories from these days and so many stories and so many people are very moved by it still today, 30 years on. So for me, this has been kind of a mystery for quite a long time. In Sweden, we don't really know what happened. The investigation here was quite complicated. The conviction and the trial was also quite difficult to understand sitting in Sweden. So basically, I just wanted to come over here and understand what happened now when there's a new appeal coming up in November, to kind of tell the story for the Swedish audience and make it kind of, explain what really happened here.
Are you trying to find an answer to the question of who did this?
I would say that my show is not really about proving anyone's innocence or guilt. It's more about telling the story about the investigation and the trial here, because it is a complicated story, and a lot of things in that investigation are quite difficult to understand. So I'm trying to kind of explain to a Swedish audience what actually happened and what some of the question marks are here.
So David Tamaheri is a convicted double murderer. Do you plan to speak to him for the podcast, or who are you trying to talk to?
So really, I just want to talk to everyone that wants to talk to me. I want to talk to people that lived on the Coromandel Peninsula back in 1989. I want to speak to people that worked with the police. Of course, I want to speak to David Tamaheri himself. I can't really go into that much detail about it, but he's not going to be on my show, unfortunately. But I want to speak to as many people as possible that remembers anything from this, really, because I think it's really important that we don't forget this story, because there are so many unanswered questions about this. What happened to Urban and Heidi? So I think it's important that we kind of once and for all tell the story and try to remember as clearly as possible what actually happened. Also for future generations to look at this, because of a lot of the people that were there, a lot of the key figures unfortunately have passed away and are getting older and older. So I see it kind of as my job to meet up with them, to interview them and to record this for the future, because this it's important not to forget the tragedy that happened here.
How responsive are people?
Well, I mean, I would say very responsive. It's been a very interesting experience for me traveling around the Coromandel Peninsula trying to talk to people here. I mean, and I think with cases like this, when there's a lot of unanswered questions, you naturally will have a lot of different theories, right? So that's what I see in Thames. It seems like every single person here in Thames has their own theory of what happened, and some of them lean more towards conspiracy theories, I would say. So it's difficult also to navigate between all the different theories and know what's actually what's true and what's just speculation. But I would say that people are very responsive. This is one of the big surprises to me, that when I got here, people still remembered, and people are still very, very moved about with this up until this day. So yeah, it's been great actually.
Have you gone back into the bush where this happened?
Yeah, so a couple of days ago, I was up I tried to walk to Crosby's Clearing, which is the place where two of the trampers saw a man that they claimed was David Tamihere and a blonde woman that people would think was Heidi Pakkonen. But unfortunately, due to the cyclone, I couldn't go all the way up. But I went up to where they parked their car and kind of looked at that area. And that's also very interesting because that's, to understand this case, you need to understand the Crown story and David Tamihere's story. And there are some key aspects where they differ. So it's really important for me to try to understand the environment here and understand the bush and see what kind of place we're talking about. So it's been really helpful.
Obviously, some of the controversy around the case involved the use of jailhouse informants. Will you be looking into that element?
Absolutely, and this is one of the things that I think is incredible about this case, the fact that they use these jailhouse informants. And I mean, it's not the fact that there are inmates in a prison, right? The main problem here is that you are using informants and you reward informants. And this is something that I think this is very rare, actually. We wouldn't do it in Sweden. Just hearing about this from the people that actually worked with them, it's mind-boggling to hear that the New Zealand court system would actually use such a system. Because how can you know that that's what they're saying is true if they've been rewarded for their participation in the trial? So that's definitely one of the things that I'm looking at. And it also kind of has a little bit to do with Sweden now, because in Sweden, the government is trying to tackle the gang violence in Sweden. And one of the countermeasures that they're trying to implement is to change the laws and actually use secret anonymous testimonies in courts. So it's a big political question in Sweden too. So therefore it's really interesting to cover this here.
So if anyone listening to this had anything to do with the case or has information, what should they do if they'd like to talk to you?
So I think this is a really important time now to talk about this and to remember this. So I would love to talk to everyone or anyone who has anything to say about this. People that met Urban and Heidi during their travels, or people that work with the police, or people that work with the trial, especially people that work with the prosecution. I think it would be really interesting for the Swedish audience to actually hear them and to hear what they thought about everything. So please get in touch with me if you can. I would love to hear more about this case, really.
Right, if you do have information that you think might be of interest to Luva, you can contact him via a link. We're going to put it on our website. It'll be there by the end of the program. There'll be details of how you can get in contact with him if you think you want to have a chat. It is 9 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Western Springs Stadium is closed for the foreseeable future after significant flooding damage, with no guarantee of when it will reopen. The stadium is home to numerous concerts, Auckland Speedway and Ponsonby Rugby Club. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Bazi have the story.
Director of Stadiums at Tātaki Auckland Unlimited, James Parkinson, recalls the night of the Auckland anniversary floods here at Western Springs Stadium.
We had water right through in this main stadium, probably roughly halfway up the Speedway concrete wall there. It had over 600 mils of water through the main building. We had water just cascading down these slopes.
It's been closed to the public ever since, with a long list of repairs. The electrical wiring needs to be fully replaced, the club rooms are contaminated, the car park is sinking, and slips and damaged fencing have closed off the grandstand seating and toilets. While some concerts hosted at the next-door Western Springs Park are managing to go ahead, relying on generators and limited space, That's not possible for those reliant on the stadium.
So in this area here is where all the electronics are held for the broadcast, the live streaming, etc. The water's come through at about sort of between thigh height and washed through all their database and electronics. You can see the screens that are still stored here are all washed through.
General Manager of Western Springs Speedway, John McCullum, says the venue is crucial for them.
Iconic for Speedway, not only in New Zealand but around the world. It's known as the home of Speedway, so it's a huge blow to us to have our home taken away.
Their season runs from October to March. Off the back of COVID, they had their hopes pinned on this summer to make a comeback, with thousands of fans expected from around the world to attend their meetings.
When you're budgeting on 12 meetings and you only run, in our case, 5, with a couple of rainouts and the ones lost, it makes an enormous impact on our business.
With this season off the table, John says they're hoping to be back in action by the start of the next one in October.
It would be crucial for us to start the season, and nice to be able to, as we did this year, look ahead and go, we've got a clean run, there's no COVID, there's no interruption, and then the floods come. So let's fingers crossed next year that we don't have anything else.
A more updated report is due in a few months' time to indicate whether or not that might be possible. James Parkinson says at the moment they've got no indication on when they can reopen.
Hope is probably the word that we're trying to hang on to right now. We really will not know what the outlook is beyond June. We'll then have to regroup at that time and work out what the time frame is moving forward.
With rugby season around the corner, Ponsonby Rugby Club are now searching for other venues to relocate to. This all comes as Auckland Unlimited is facing sharp cuts to its funding in the new budget.
It is a concern at a time when the council family is trying to minimise reliance on ratepayer funding, and we have had a key venue out of action from anniversary weekend.
Public consultation on the council's budget is now open, and a final decision will be made at the end of June.
If you were listening to that on radio, the video version of that story will be on our webpage. The lower North Island town of Foxton is about to have a clearer horizon as disused trolley bus lines come down. Their removal after a court case ends any nostalgic hope of the former tourist attraction rumbling down the main street again. Our reporter Jimmy Allingham has more.
It's been several years since the final bus trundled a slow loop around Foxton. Now the last physical reminders of a once popular labour of love are coming down.
We're just removing the trolley bus line. They're dropping it down, getting rid of it, yeah.
What sort of condition is it in?
Poor condition. Considering it hasn't been used for a very long time.
That's Ben Duncan from Lines Company Electra. He says, depending on traffic, it will take his team until the end of the week to get rid of the lines and posts along Main Street.
So they're not live, they're old. Yeah, just time to come down, eyesore.
Trolley bus rides and their accompanying museum were for decades a tourism mainstay in the town, created by Ian and Christina Little in the late 1980s. After their deaths, the last bus ran almost 7 years ago, although their son Malcolm told the local newspaper he wants to see the buses return. But, as Hodowhenua District Council Chief Executive Monique Davidson says, officials became concerned the trolley bus lines were a hazard. A district court judge agrees, giving the okay to their removal.
Just last week, the court has, in our view, kind of cleared the way for council to be able to move forward with removing the trolley lines. This has been a long-going issue. Council have wanted those trolley lines removed for some years.
But because the council doesn't own the lines, there were concerns it didn't have the right to pull them down.
So we've gone through quite a long and expensive court process, which led to the court requiring the owners to remove the trolley line. They haven't done that to date, so we went back to court to seek permission to remove them ourselves.
Mrs Davidson says that cost was about $80,000 and the council will seek to reclaim it. On the streets of Foxton, people had mixed feelings watching the lines come down.
It's disappointing that things like that haven't been kept.
Oh, well, I just feel that by taking the lines down, the character of Foxton goes in certain ways, but I can also understand them coming down because it sort of opens up the space a bit more.
Yeah, it's a shame that they're going. I'd love to see them, going again, a big thing for Foxton.
when it was a tiny little town. It was wonderful. And you know, Ian used to get us on the tram and even take us down to the beach for a drink, and then we could come back again. It was different. It was different days.
Mrs Davidson acknowledges the bus's place in Foxton history, but says the town still has plenty going for it.
Foxton has so many fabulous things to offer. In the time that the trolley line stopped being utilised, we've had incredible businesses, incredible community members, and even council itself invest in facilities like Te Awaho Newsstream.
RNZ was unable to contact Malcolm Little this week.
Now, some of your feedback before the news at 6, a lot of you getting in touch about Labour's policy changes. This person says very concerned about dumping of policies, not impressed with the process, and will be very interested in Labour's alternative climate initiatives. Valerie says, kia ora, Lisa. The government has burned communities and future generations by ditching the beverage container return scheme, which is in place in almost all other Western countries. It is a wildly popular idea across the political spectrum and is a simple solution for waste and climate change. Another says scrapping climate policies isn't a betrayal of the Greens, it is a betrayal of the planet. I'm thinking of all the rangatahi who have marched in the streets and petitioned the government, and all the climate change academics and activists who have begged for years for change. It is about them, it is about our future in Aotearoa, not just political parties. This person says, I'm confused. What does Labour now stand for? The Clark government had the courage of its convictions, but Mr Hipkins seems to prioritise the polls above all else. I don't buy the bandwidth argument. The fact is that Cyclone Gabrielle gave him a chance to ditch anything that the opposition had in its sights, and he grasped it with both hands. But what then will it have achieved in its 6 years? Very disillusioned, that person says. Another says if Labour doesn't win the next general election, there won't be any climate change policies anyway. It's political pragmatism.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The Hutt City Mayor says a broken and leaking water pipe that's caused a large landslide in Eastbourne was reported to the council in January. Hutt City Mayor Campbell Barry says 75 houses are without power, 165 houses in the wider area are without water, and 20 homes only have pedestrian access after a slip at Point Howard today. Campbell Barry told Checkpoint the broken pipe was fixed after being reported but then broke again. He says it's too early to tell exactly what's caused the slip, whose land it's on and who's responsible for fixing it.
We, of course, had a heavy rainfall event yesterday, and we will be looking into that to get to the bottom of exactly what has caused it. We do have a challenge, of course, with leaks in the Wellington region, but we do want to be reassured of exactly what's happened here in Wellington Water's processes in dealing with leaks.
Campbell Barry says it could be another 24 hours until residents have water restored. Auckland residents are bracing for more expensive water bills later this year. From July the 1st, Watercare will increase its prices by 9.5% to fund infrastructure upgrades. City Centre Residents Group spokesperson Anthony Phillips says every dollar counts.
These costs may not be terribly noticeable to a double-income household, but when you've got an 85-year-old who still has a little mortgage living in an apartment on their own in the city centre, that small increase is actually a massive increase to people like that.
Watercare says the average household can expect to see their bill increase by $2.20 each week. The local share market continues to be rattled by investor caution caused by the US banking collapse. The benchmark top 50 index has fallen more than 60 points, or 0.5% today, off its earlier session lows. At one stage, the index was down more than 1% as Australian banking and financial stocks fell sharply. Investment managers say New Zealand is reflecting the global nervousness about the safety of smaller regional banks in the US. NZEI Te Riuroa has confirmed the primary school teachers will strike on Thursday. The union's negotiation team met with the Ministry of Education today, but no improvement was made on the government's pay offer. Secondary teachers also are planning to strike. A teenager who fatally stabbed a 16-year-old boy and seriously injured 2 more outside an Airbnb house party in Christchurch has been sentenced to 5 years and 6 months in prison. Kanye Eruera Harimatetehuhu is now 18, attacked Zion Purukamu and the others with a knife outside the Fendleton rental property in August 2021. Tehuhu pleaded guilty last year to manslaughter and 2 counts of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. Zion's tearful parents took his ashes to court and sat in the public gallery with other whānau and supporters wearing tops with his photograph and name printed on the front. The Green Party is frustrated at the progress made since the government declared a climate emergency. The emergency was formally declared by Climate Change Minister James Shaw and former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in 2020, shortly after Labour won its second term. The declaration called for more action and leadership in reducing emissions, but yesterday the government dumped a number of policies which were specifically designed to do so. Green co-leaders James Shaw and Marama Davidson say it's disappointing.
I don't think that this government has treated it with the level of urgency that was outlined in the Cabinet paper when we declared that climate emergency.
It is too slow. The rate of change in reducing climate pollution is too slow.
Marama Davidson says that Labour will need to be stronger on climate action and inequality if it wants to work with the Greens after the election. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky says the country's future hinges on the outcome of battles in the east, including in and around Bakhmut. The ruined mining town has become the focus of Russia's invasion, with the months-long fight for it becoming Europe's bloodiest infantry battle since World War II. In his nightly video address, Mr. Zelensky says the fighting was tough and very painful, but vowed to destroy Russia's military power. On the battlefront, Ukrainian soldiers said they were repelling attacks near Kremina, north of Bakhmut. Australia's nuclear-powered submarine program with the United States and Britain reportedly will cost up to $400 billion over 3 decades. The US, UK and Australian leaders have today unveiled details of how Australia will get a fleet of nuclear-powered subs to counter China under the AUKUS Pact. A study of over 900 people over many years shows that victims of child abuse are likely to suffer from multiple problems in later life. The Dunedin study has followed the development of the same people over the last 50 years. The findings are published in the Journal of Development and Psychopathology. Andrew McRae reports.
The study reveals 19% reported unwanted sexual contact before the age of 16. They were 1.5 to 2 times more likely than their peers to experience adverse outcomes as an adult. This included smoking and alcohol use, mental health, sexually transmitted diseases, relationship difficulties and financial problems. They were also up to 4 times more likely to have attempted suicide. It says the level of difficulties increased depending on the severity of abuse.
And a day before the 4th anniversary of the Christchurch mosque shootings, new dates have been set aside for the coronial inquiry into the attacks, where 51 people died. The inquest was due to be heard over 4 weeks during May, but proceedings were pushed back earlier this month due to the amount of evidence being prepared. 6 weeks of hearings will now start on October the 24th. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, the heavy price tradies are paying because we want beautiful engineered stone kitchen and bathroom bench tops.
The dust is so tiny, the particles, that it embeds into your lungs, and eventually you can't breathe, you suffocate, you're strangled to death. And it's a terrible, terrible death.
The Detail on Apple, Spotify, RNZ, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Fine apart from a few cloudy periods this afternoon. For the remainder of Tika Maui, fine apart from areas of cloud tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, fine today. From tonight, some cloud, and tomorrow, isolated showers about Westland. Looking at Fiordland, often cloudy with a few showers about southern Fiordland. Spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine. Some areas of morning and evening cloud. Otago, partly cloudy today. Tomorrow, isolated showers about eastern Otago. For Southland, some cloud. A few showers retreating to the coast towards evening and clearing tomorrow with fine breaks developing. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers. It's 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Aucklanders' water bills are about to go up. Watercare plans to increase the cost of water by almost 10%. Felix Walton has more.
Kumeu and Huapai know all about flooding, having been hit with floods 3 times in the last 18 months.
Yeah, wastewater's a big deal. Everyone wants to wash their cars, everyone wants to wash their house.
They need to upgrade the pipes that are falling apart.
They definitely need upgrades, and the council needs to go and clean the drains, especially around Kumeu Huapai, where it always seems to flood.
These locals say the current infrastructure simply isn't cutting it. One resident says the recent flooding convinced him that more investment is worthwhile.
I guess you would have to look at the flooding, especially around the local area here in Kumeu. It's pretty bad, so if it means that that's being fixed, then you can't really complain about that.
But he questions whether it's the right time for a cost increase.
I'm pretty sure everyone would have the same feeling that it's not the best timing, just given what's going on. Our rates have gone up, the cost of the housing's up, interest rates are going up, so to add another 10% on top of an outgoing is pretty bad timing.
Watercare says it will increase household water charges by 9.5% starting from July. Chief Executive Dave Chambers told Morning Report it was unavoidable.
Unfortunately, with the amount of investment that we need to do around Auckland to upgrade our infrastructure, unfortunately, this is the price that goes with that.
Rodney local board member Guy Wishart says infrastructure upgrades are worth the cost. The flooding in his area has been ugly.
There is a problem in our area that every time we have flooding, the stormwater and the sewage systems get affected and we get raw sewage running across the ground.
On paper, the 9.5% increase won't break the bank. For an average household, water costs will increase by just $2.20 per week. But City Centre Residents Group spokesperson Anthony Phillips says every dollar counts.
These costs may not be terribly noticeable to a double-income household, but when you've got an 85-year-old who still has a little mortgage living in an apartment on their own in the city centre, that small increase is actually a massive increase to people like that.
Regardless, Mr Phillips says water isn't something to cheap out on.
Water is an absolute lifeline. So we can't survive without it. And we need it to be clean. We need it to be constantly there when we turn the taps on. We need it to help flush the toilet. We need it to eat and drink. So it's very much part of our survival.
The price increase will come into effect from July the 1st.
Immigration officials are reviewing decisions they made to turn down some Iranian applicants who wanted to visit their New Zealand-based relatives. Immigration had concerns families were at risk of overstaying because of the political situation in Iran. Other families are still battling similar refusals and questioning immigration's stance. Jill Bonnet reports.
Armin Saeedi's parents had applied twice to visit their son in Auckland since the border reopened last August. But Immigration New Zealand told them they wouldn't return if they came here, citing the economic and geopolitical situation in Iran. After he spoke to RNZ a fortnight ago, his case was reviewed and they were approved. They're now due to arrive this week, with plans to celebrate the upcoming Persian New Year and take a family trip to the South Island.
I'm so glad that finally we could get it. My mom started crying. She was very happy regarding that, and she realized that finally we can meet each other again. So that was very glad news for us.
But Mr Saeedi, a data analyst, says about 80 Iranian families he knows through social media are still hoping immigration will have a change of mind about their cases. Immigration New Zealand says it empathises with the difficult situation families find themselves in because of circumstances in their home country, but it says those circumstances may discourage them from returning to Iran when their visa expires. Immigration says it's reconsidering 4 other cases where Iranian parents have previously visited New Zealand. Mashi Ahmedi Siena's application is not among them, as this would be her mother's first visa. Her 1-year-old son is about to undergo surgery and she wants her mum to be with her.
I feel so broken. I was always proud how New Zealand is like a welcoming country, but after all of this, I really feel like my emotions, my mental health, my family is not even matter. Like, how can you ignore a mom of 1-year-old who's seeking for help and want her mom to be here when my son is going through the most difficult stage of his life?
She says immigration should be upfront about what evidence it really wants to see from applicants and trust the sponsorship undertakings that New Zealand-based families give. She says her mother has plenty of reasons to return to Iran.
My mom and dad are married for 30 years. They have shared properties, 2 houses, 2 lands. They have family business. Moreover, my brother lives with my mom and dad. And not to mention that my mom has 6 siblings in Iran. Aren't these actually enough reason for my mom to go back? Okay, if this is not enough, why they didn't try to reach me and ask me for more information?
Ms Ahmadi says when other Iranian families have asked immigration that question, they've been told there are high volumes of applications and that they can't contact everyone. Immigration New Zealand has been approached for comment about Ms Ahmadi's case.
In a statement, Immigration New Zealand says this is a difficult situation for those involved and it recognises this was not the decision the family had hoped for. It says there was not enough evidence provided with the application to satisfy the immigration officer that she was a bona fide applicant intending a temporary stay in New Zealand and she had not visited here before. It says it must appropriately weigh and balance the evidence submitted with the application along with the circumstances of the applicant. It is almost 14 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. To Australia now, where floodwaters have peaked across large parts of northwest Queensland, but the full extent of the devastation wrought by these record floods is unclear. Some farmers estimate they've lost more than 10,000 cattle. The ABC's Annie Guest reports.
As the floodwaters head south, work is underway to protect homesteads in other parts of far western Queensland and even over the border in the Northern Territory. Boulia Mayor Rick Britton says people are using bulldozers to create makeshift levees.
Well, mate, I suppose that's when you have got very strong communities, people helping each other out. I know they've taken a machinery over there to build a weir or a levee around the homestead. So, yeah, mate, it's just people are aware and, you've got helicopters and neighbours working together and it's bloody good to see.
In the Gulf country, floodwaters have peaked and some graziers are estimating losses of more than 10,000 head of cattle. Councillor Britton is grateful there's been more of a chance to shift livestock out of danger in his region.
Helicopters are a big tool in the cattle industry, so a lot of those cattle are used to being mustered with helicopters. So, it'd be pretty easy to get out onto the high country. There could be some losses, but it won't be a massive. It's different to the Gulf, mate. Like that water come pretty fast, where out here, the Georgina flowing into Lake Eyre, it's a slow-moving beast.
Once the water has moved south and roads become more accessible, there'll be help from organisations like Blaze Aid. Vice President Chris Mayle says volunteers sign up after every rural disaster to assist recovery efforts.
There'll be a lot of help needed to rebuild fences and get paddocks in operation again. Gates and troughs and things will need to be attended to. There'll also be a lot of outbuilding damage, so there'll be help needed to repair that, as well as clean it out and get rid of all the rubbish that will have washed in over the period of the high water.
How high is the level of interest from your volunteers in going to places like the Gulf of Carpentaria after a disaster like this?
We've got the most amazing volunteers and the level is high. There's always lots of phone calls after any disaster and people will respond. A lot of people from the southern parts of Australia head north for the winter and they'll go up there and they'll perhaps give you a week or a fortnight, maybe a month of their time while they're escaping the cold in the southern parts of Australia.
Meanwhile, aerial food drops are continuing for isolated communities such as Doomadgee and Burketown, while hay is being dropped to stranded livestock.
Stocks in some US banks continue to plunge despite the president's attempts to reassure Americans their money is safe. It comes after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. European markets are also affected. They closed down by more than 2%. And the US is trying to stop people taking out funds from banks after the biggest such collapse in the US in 15 years. CNN's Phil Mattingly has this report.
The bottom line is this: Americans can rest assured that our banking system is safe.
President Biden seeking to reassure a nation on edge.
During the Obama-Biden administration, we put in place tough requirements on banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank.
He also placed blame on his predecessor for contributing to this moment.
Unfortunately, the last administration rolled back some of these requirements.
Biden pointing to a 2018 law that eased some of the strictest post-financial crisis restrictions on mid-sized lenders like Silicon Valley Bank.
I'm going to ask Congress and the banking regulators to strengthen the rules for banks to make it less likely this kind of bank failure would happen again.
Biden's new regulatory push framing a new crisis moment.
Treasury Secretary Yellen and a team of banking regulators have taken action.
Just hours after the administration's top finance officials triggered a dramatic show of dual-pronged government force. The action designed to halt financial contagion that threatened to rip through the banking system after the failure of Silicon Valley Bank. The bank's failure on Friday risking a cascade of events that threatened financial stability, with a second bank failure Sunday and several more institutions on the brink, officials said.
When we learned of the problems of the banks and the impact they could have on jobs of small businesses and banking system overall, I instructed my team to act quickly to protect these interests.
93% of Silicon Valley Bank's deposits sat above the $250,000 deposit insurance limit.
I've been working all weekend with our banking regulators to design appropriate policies to address this situation,
leaving thousands of small businesses and individuals at risk.
I instructed my team to act quickly to protect these interests. They've done that.
But the speed of the crisis and the potential systemic effects marking a jarring turn for an industry viewed as stable and well capitalized.
There are important questions of how these banks got into the circumstance in the first place. We must get the full accounting of what happened and why those responsible can be held accountable.
And setting the stage for an equally unpredictable political fallout in the days ahead, as officials move quickly to try and separate their actions from the politically toxic bailouts of the 2008 financial crisis.
No losses will be, and this is an important point, no losses will be borne by the taxpayers.
As the US, the UK and Australia reveal details of their new security pact, the British leader, Rishi Sunak, has once again warned of the growing threats posed by China. He says the UK needs to take steps to protect its interests, such as blocking Chinese investment in sensitive sectors. Meanwhile, the Chinese President Xi Jinping has vowed to bolster national security and build the country's military into a Great Wall of Steel. CNN's Selena Wang reports.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping vows to build the country's military into a Great Wall of Steel in his first speech of his unprecedented third term as president. But the biggest applause from the rubber stamp parliament came after Xi repeated the pledge to reunite Taiwan with the motherland. It marks the end of a week-long political meeting that saw Xi further consolidate his power and drive home how China needs to fortify itself against America's campaign to contain the country. Less than a day after his speech, U.S. President Joe Biden hosting British and Australian leaders to discuss details of the new AUKUS Defense Pact that's seen as a bid to counter China in the Pacific. China's new foreign minister, Qin Gang, has accused Washington of plotting an Asia-Pacific version of NATO and called America's China strategy a reckless gamble. But Li Qiang tried striking a more conciliatory tone in his first press conference as premier, China's #2 official. Li said U.S. and China decoupling is hype, pointing out that trade between the two countries reached a record high last year. One of Xi's most trusted proteges, Li is the former Shanghai party boss that oversaw the city's brutal 2-month COVID lockdown last spring. He tried downplaying Beijing's crackdown on tech and private businesses, calling on officials to support private sector growth. But Li steps into premiership with a tough road ahead. The economy still battered after 3 years of tough COVID restrictions, U.S. sanctions, and deteriorating diplomatic relations with the West. But China's economic and political powers are growing elsewhere. Beijing hosted talks between Saudi Arabia and Iran that led to a breakthrough. The two nations agreed to bury the hatchet and restore ties. It's a geopolitical win amid growing concerns about Beijing's deepening ties with Russia and refusal to call the conflict in Ukraine an invasion.
Xi Jinping made it very clear that he wants to restore China's position. China will play a leadership role in the international arena. So I would say that Xi Jinping tried to learn from Putin to consolidate his power. So he sees Russia and also Putin leadership as a lower model. The relationship is too deep.
But Beijing is trying to use that relationship to build the narrative that Xi Jinping's a global problem solver, one who calls the shots at home and abroad.
The BBC has backed down and will allow the prominent football pundit Gary Lineker back on air after suspending him for publicly criticising the British government's tough asylum reforms. The broadcaster says it will carry out an independent review of its social media and impartiality guidelines. A Conservative government backbencher called it a pathetic capitulation. The BBC's David Silito has more.
Good morning, Gary. Good morning, Mr. Lineker. Good morning, Gary. How do you feel about being reinstated?
As Gary Lineker left home this morning, the weekend's dramas that saw him taken off air and chaos brought to the BBC's sporting output looked to have been resolved. This was match the day 2 yesterday, after presenters, pundits and commentators downed microphones in protest at his treatment. But the BBC says there was good reason for his actions. He'd broken guidelines with tweets in which he described government asylum policy as immeasurably cruel and the language not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. However, he's made no apology, nor is there a sanction, merely an agreement to abide by guidelines, while the BBC re-examines those guidelines.
This looks like a complete climb down by the BBC.
I don't think so. I think I've always said we needed to take proportionate action. For some people, by the way, we've taken too severe action, David. Others think we're being too lenient.
Re-examining guidance and guidelines sounds like kicking the can down the road. Has Gary Lineker agreed to stop tweeting about politics, which is what you asked on Friday?
What we've agreed, and I've spent time talking to Gary, and we've had lots of discussion, is that between now and when the review reports, Gary will abide by the editorial guidelines, and that's where we are.
How are you so out of touch with your own corporation, your own organisation, your own staff, your own programmes, that you didn't foresee this complete chaos that's happened to the organisation?
Well, look, I respect the views of the sports teams. They obviously were put in a very difficult situation. I think people across the BBC, if you talk to them, are all very passionate about our standing as an impartial broadcaster. That's a really important thing.
Thank you, Stephanie. That word, impartiality, it does raise a few questions, though. For instance, the man at the top of the BBC, Chairman Richard Sharp, is a former Conservative donor and the subject of an ongoing inquiry into what role he played in a loan guarantee to Boris Johnson. And Tim Davie was also himself, at one point, an active member of the Conservative Party.
There are many people, and all they see here is a Conservative Director-General and a Conservative Chairman bowing to pressure from Conservative MPs and the Conservative press.
I can tell you, anyone who knows me knows that, yes, 30 years ago, some political involvement, but absolutely not affected by pressure from one party or the other. That is not how we work editorially in the BBC. On the question regarding the chairman, and one of the people I don't appoint is the chairman.
And Gary Lineker isn't the only famous BBC face to recently express political opinions. What about Alan Sugar on the rail unions, Deborah Meaden on Brexit, Chris Packham on hunting? One former architect of BBC guidelines has a few doubts that a review will solve it all.
It's not remotely a problem solved. It's a problem shelved for the time being. Gary will be back. We'll all be pleased about that. Gary will continue to hold his views. He says he will continue to abide by the BBC's guidelines until they're rewritten, but then he was supposed to be abiding by the BBC guidelines last week when he tweeted what he tweeted.
One thing is certain, his tweets are going to be scrutinised. Today, he gave thanks to those who'd supported him and expressed sympathies for refugees.
Now to the tale of Rambo the fox. Did capture in the Australian outback. Drones, traps and trackers failed to catch the wily predator, whose existence was preventing the authorities from reintroducing native species into a fenced-off area in New South Wales. On the hunt for the story, here's the BBC's Rachel Wright.
The Australian Wildlife Conservancy was very proud of its 32 kilometres of fencing with its 200 tonnes of wire and fence post for a new protected area in New South Wales. It was designed to keep out predators such as foxes. Red foxes were introduced into Australia in the mid-1800s for recreational hunting, but have killed many native animals. Conservationists wanted to use the protected area to reintroduce species such as the greater bilby and the brush-tailed beetong, which had become regionally extinct. But they had one big problem. They couldn't catch Rambo the fox. Rambo was named after the unkillable action hero played by Sylvester Stallone, and he was born in 2018 before the fence was constructed. Wayne Sparrow, who manages the area, thinks Rambo grew up knowing he had been targeted for removal, so was very shy. Wayne Sparrow spoke in 2020 about his attempts to trap the fox.
We have upwards of 110 cameras deployed 24/7. We drag our tracks 3 times a week lately to see what animals are crossing the roadways, and that's how we know we have a fox remaining. We've used the traditional 1080 baiting, soft jaw trapping, cage trapping, thermal rifle shooting, traditional spotlight rifle shooting. We've even invested in some unique thermal drone. And we actually have a team of dogs on site at the moment, hopeful to find him hiding in a hollow log where we might be able to remove him.
But all the specialist trackers, infrared cameras and dogs couldn't find the red fox named Rambo. However, there has been no camera footage of him since October last year. And conservationists have finally declared the fenced-off area feral-free and have at last begun introducing bilbies and bridled nail-tail wallabies. They think Rambo probably drowned in last year's unprecedented floods. Mother Nature appears to have done what a long line of hunters, scientists and rangers couldn't, and outfoxed Rambo at last.
Can't help but feel a little sympathy for Rambo. That is all we've got time for. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. 4 years on from the mosque attacks. First Up speaks to a woman who says the tragedy gave her the courage to start wearing a hijab.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Ko Evie Ashton, tēnei. Another Wellington water pipe has burst, this time on Hutt Road in Kaiwhadawhada. Wellington Water says it seems to be a redundant supply that's still connected to a main pipe. Meanwhile, about 30 houses in Lower Hutt will be without water until tomorrow, despite a temporary supply being activated after a landslide in the suburb of Point Howard. Primary school teachers will strike on Thursday. NZEI Te Reo says it met with the Ministry of Education today, but the government didn't improve its pay offer. And a pedestrian's in a critical condition after a car crash in the Christchurch suburb of Sockburn this afternoon. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan, every 52 minutes, someone, somewhere around the world will die from an eating disorder. Anorexia, bulimia and binge eating are among the deadliest mental illnesses. They most commonly start in childhood between the ages of 12 and 15. To treat eating disorders, we have to understand them, says Professor Cynthia Bullock. She's one of the